Good day, everybody. Welcome back to Sword Wolf Forge. Today we're ready to proceed in our next series of our Knife Making 101 series. We're going to be doing our grinding today. If you've been following along, we've designed our blade, we've cut it out, we've heat treated it. It's properly heat treated now, and now we're ready to move on to grinding the bevels. Now there's a lot more to grinding a bevel than just simply going up to a grinder. There's a lot of things that we want to consider before we start just grinding. So I'm going to go over the different types of grinds that there are, the pros and cons of each grind. I'm also going to show you some of the special tools I use to help you at least get started and give you a couple pointers, because grinding is a very slow and painful learning curve at first. But it's one of those things where if you stick to it and learn muscle memory and such, you will get it eventually. So less talking, more doing. I'm going to take you over to the table and we'll start talking about the different grinds that there are. Okay, so I've got an example of most of the common knife grinds that we use in the knife world. And I'll just kind of run down the different types and some of the pros and cons of each. And then we'll kind of go into how we want to go with our knife. The first one we'll start out with is a flat grind. If you notice, there's no secondary bevels. What this is, it's just flat on each side, and it comes to a point. And you'll see these fairly common in kitchen knives. They're really good for slicing. They're real thin. But if you notice, there's not a lot of meat behind your cutting edge. So it's made more for, finesse, slicing, and that's why you'll find them more in kitchen knives. The next one's a scandi grind or a saber grind. These two don't have secondary bevels. The angle is more steep than the flat. It only takes up a percentage of the knife, so you have more meat supporting your edge. And you'll commonly see these in like bushcraft knives. Also, here's an example. If you can see, the grind doesn't go all the way to the top of the blade. This is a K-bar Marine Corps fighting knife. And so you'll get a more robust cutting edge, but it is wider. Okay, so it wouldn't slice as well. But that's not what it's made. It's made for a lot of different things. I don't have an example of a hollow grind, but this is kind of what it looks like. It usually does have a secondary bevel, and it's made to be able to slice more efficiently. And so, like, whatever you're slicing doesn't stick to the blade as much. It also lightens up the blade somewhat. It is more complicated to do, though. Normally you would do this with a grinding wheel. And as you can see, too, you also don't have as much metal supporting your secondary bevel. But I've done some before. And normally you see these on like buoys. The next grind we're going to look at is a convex grind, or some people might call it like an acorn grind. As you can see, there's a lot more metal or meat supporting your edge. Okay. Normally you'll see like convex grinds on axes or hatchets. The lighting might not be the best in here, but you can see that it's a lot more not concave, just a lot more meat supporting it. And normally, I mean, this thing's sharp, but you're not going to cut a tomato with it. But it's used for splitting wood. It pushes whatever you're cutting or slicing away from the edge. So that's a convex grind right there. typically, now I'll go over the chisel first. Chisel is just what, like it says. I mean, this is a chisel right here. It's got a grind on one side and nothing on the other. And this is the most common item you'll see a chisel grind on. One is it's a chisel. There are some Japanese cooking knives, though, that do utilize that. I don't utilize it myself, but it is an option. And the most common one you're going to really see is compound. Okay. You almost want to take the best out of both worlds. This is normally what I do. A lot of times I'll either do a flat grind and put a secondary bevel to support your edge better. And sometimes I'll do a scandi and I'll put a secondary bevel on that as well. This all leads it, you're probably going to hear the term edge geometry. And I'm not going to go in a lot of detail because this is just a 101 class. But when you hear edge geometry, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the angles and do you have a secondary bevel? How much is the bevel supported? And what that does is it affects your cutting abilities. So like you're not going to use a convex edge. Like we said, those are for axes. You're not going to use that in the kitchen versus, we saw, this thing's super sharp. It'll slice right through a tomato, but you don't have a lot of supporting material on the edge. So you're not going to use that to chop down a tree. So normally we would go over this in our planning phase, but I wanted to kind of keep this in our grinding phase so we don't, move all over the place. So that being said, with our knife that we're going to be doing today, we're going to do a compound, mainly flat. Okay, we're going to bring our bevels all the way to the top. And then we're going to put a secondary bevel on it for robustness to keep our edge supported better. And another reason we're going to do the flat is it's the easiest to do. Okay, I've said it time and time again, set yourself up for success, not failure. Grinding is hard anyway when you're starting out. So a flat grind, it's an all-around good grind especially for a beginner, but for any knife. And we will put a secondary bevel on that again for more support. But when you get into more of these complex grinds, do that later down the road. So let's get over to the grinder. I'm going to show you a couple different ways to get started. Well, we're not going to do that first. First, we're going to lay this out. I'm going to show you how I lay this out to be able to make sure that you get your grind centered. And I'm going to show you how to get really good plunge lines as well. So that'll be our next segment. Okay, before we start grinding, we've already established what kind of bevel we want to grind in there, but we want to find a center line so we know where to grind so that our bevels are nice and centered. Okay, if you don't do this, you're running a risk of having one bevel or your cutting edge to one side or the other. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways of doing this. I'm going to show you the way I do it. I went ahead and cleaned up the blade a little bit, and we're going to apply this layout fluid. Now, you don't need to use layout fluid. You can also use like a black Sharpie. Okay, but I'm going to spray this layout fluid so I can define where my center line is. So I'm going to show you a couple tricks on how to do this pretty cost effectively. You don't have to get a bunch of special tools. You don't have to get a bunch of scribers and do a bunch of math. I'll show you a real easy way to do this. So I'm going to pull this away and spray this on here real quick. And you can see now I've got the dye on the cutting edge area. I'm going to let it dry for a couple seconds. And again, you could take a Sharpie and do the same thing. Now I want to get something that's nice and flat. And again, you can get scribe tools and everything, but then you got to measure the thickness of the blade, divide that by 2, find the right height, and then you can scribe this. Or if you remember back, we used 3/16 thick stock to cut out this blade. I have here a 3/16 drill bit. So that means that that point is going to be at the center. So all you really need to do is you can take this, lay it flat on your flat surface. And you want this flat, okay? You can't do this on a wood table or anything. You want something that's nice and flat. And you just run it a couple times. And a lot of times I'll flip it over. And I don't know if you can see that. If you can see it, I've got a nice now center line. So I know now where to grind to. So that's a quick and easy way of doing this. And you would do this too for, like, if you're doing a false edge. I do this when I do a false edge as well. I could do the same thing. Also, if we were going to be doing like a scandi grind on this instead, you can put the layout fluid on the side and you can scribe how far you want your bevels to go up. But again, we're keeping it simple today. We're going to bring our bevels all the way to the top. We're not going to worry about that today. But this is how you set yourself up for nice, centered, cutting edge, and bevels. Okay, now that we've got our center line scribed, we know where we're going to be grinding to. We do not want to bring our bevels all the way back here. We want it to terminate somewhere in here. So this is a tool I like to use a lot. It's called a knife file guide. And what it has is it has these pieces of carbide here that sandpaper, files, whatever you're using to grind your bevels will not touch. So you put it on your blade prior to grinding. You establish where you want your bevels to terminate. And then you tighten it down. And I'll show you, I'm going to use this when we're grinding here, because I still use this today. And what's nice about this is a lot of times I don't like my bevels straight up and down. I kind of like them at an angle, but we're going to keep it simple and just have them go straight up and down today. But this will help you get these nice and uniform on both sides. And you also be able to get your plunge lines fairly close together to where you'll need minimal cleanup when you refine everything. So this is a really good tool. I still use it today. It helps me a lot. And again, I'll show you how we use it when we do the belt grinder. Okay, another tool that I'm going to show you is a knife grinding jig. I made this myself a long time ago. And one of the keys to getting better at grinding is having a nice and flat grind. You don't want waves or anything like that. You want nice, consistent lines. And one of the keys is just consistent, straight back and forth. And that's difficult when you're first starting out. So what you can do is you can either purchase a knife grinding jig or make one yourself. And I will demonstrate how this is used, but again, I don't use it very much anymore because I've just gotten better at grinding. But this can help you out in the beginning. So you just clamp it in there, and then it helps with you not moving this back and forth. You'd use this on a tool rest, and again, I'll demonstrate how it's used, but we're not going to grind a lot with it. And this kind of helps you when you're first beginning to start getting kind of that muscle memory and used to moving straight back and forth. Because a lot of times in the beginning, and I see my students doing this at first, you're doing this on the grinder, and then you start getting waves and not consistent bevels across. So this does help with that. You'd move it back and forth. The only thing is there is a learning curve on this too, because as you know, we've got this curve down here. Well, it's not going to be consistent. So you kind of have to turn it when you're getting to the end of the tip. So it's good in some ways and it's not in others. It's not something that you really want to get reliant on. I never did. But in the beginning, again, it does help with getting consistent straight across bevels. The other downside is I can't use my file guide while using this. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to maybe scribe another line right here where you want your bevel to stop and your plunge lines be present. And a lot of times they'll be quite uneven. So it's almost pick and choose your poison. But again, this is a good way to at least get started. So I'm going to get everything set up. I'm going to show you step by step then now how we want to start grinding and get our bevels ground in. We're going to go over to my 2x72 grinder and we'll start grinding. Okay, there's a little bit better view of that scribe mark I was talking to you about. Now, the first thing we want to do before we start actually grinding our bevels is we want to aggressively grind at probably about a 45-degree angle to those scribe marks. So that will give me a good reference while I'm grinding these bevels, how much further I got to go before I start going overboard to the other side. So my first step is I want to do an aggressive 45-degree angle, grind to my scribe lines so I can establish my cutting edge now. And then I will grind everything else to that, if that makes sense. So I'm going to come over to the grinder. I've got a fresh 36 grit belt. Be mindful, always wear your eye protection when doing this. I've had a piece of metal in my eye before and it is not a fun experience. So again, the first thing I'm going to do then is right now, I'm going to grind in that 45-degree angle to establish my cutting edge. Okay, another thing I want you to know before we start doing this, always have a bucket of water when you're doing this, because we've heat treated this blade and we don't want it to get too hot when we're grinding. That's another reason you'll see me, I don't wear gloves when grinding. I can feel how warm the knife is getting. So most of the time what I'll do is I'll make a pass, maybe two, dip it in the water, keep it cool, because you do not want to burn out the temper in this blade. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Okay, so I about got that side done. I'm almost at the scribe mark, so I'm going to flip it over and do the other side now. Okay, if you can see that, this thing doesn't like to zoom very good. I've established now pretty much where I want my cutting edge. It's a little bit thick, but we can clean all that up, but it's going to give me enough to guide me so my cutting edge is going to be centered. And if you also notice that when I'm grinding, I am not muscling this. Let the belt, this is a 36 grit belt. It will remove steel pretty efficiently. I don't need to be jamming this in there. I'm just finessing it. Okay. I'm going to, in the next clip, I'm going to show you more. I'm going to stand back a little bit more and kind of show you some of the mechanics to help you get nice straight lines and some other keys to doing that. But again, make sure you're dipping it in water and just finesse. It doesn't have to be muscling this. Okay? Okay, so I zoomed out a little bit to kind of show you now the mechanics or how you want to posture yourself and when you're grinding. Okay? I want to be squared up with the grinder, straight ahead. I keep my elbows close in and almost move my whole body. I don't want to just be moving my arms, okay? Because the biggest key to getting good grinds on this is the blade being nice and horizontal with your platen. If you're cocked to a certain angle, and again, this is the biggest thing I see with beginners, is they're going at a certain angle, or the further they progress, they're starting to pull away or push in, and you'll start getting big gouges, and you won't have a nice, even grind the whole way through. It'll be all rough and bumpy and everything. The biggest key is consistency. Again, I want to get locked up as close as I can, and I want to move back and forth nice and even. So the whole blade is contacting this belt, not just this part. And when I'm going on the flat part, I'm just following the horizon. When I get to the tip, I still want to maintain that nice horizontal attitude towards the platen, but I start turning this up. This is where I'm making contact, and I start turning up the edge. So it's always horizontal. Wherever my contact is with the platen, that's where I want it to be horizontal. And it takes some practice. But just imagine a line right here. And you want to just keep going straight with that line. If you don't, then you're going to be, your bevels are just going to be everywhere. And again, this takes a lot of practice. The other, again, you're not pushing into this thing. You don't need to do that. Nice and finesse, nice and slow. Just focus on guiding that blade. I'm steering with this hand at this point in time. If I'm doing this side, I'm steering with this hand and I'm applying pressure with just this thumb. Nice steady pressure guiding it back and forth, nice and even. I'm also feeling the pressure and letting the belt do the work. So I'm going to zoom back in now. Now we're going to start doing our bevels. Okay. We're going to start bringing our bevels up slowly but surely until it intersects with our initial grind that we did here, until that's gone. And then we know we're really at the center point. So I'll demonstrate one side. We're not going to have 3 hours of me grinding, but I'll start a little bit, shut it off, shut the camera off, and then when I'm finished, you'll be able to see more what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm not going to come at this as that aggressive of an angle either. But we're going to establish this bevel, and pretty soon, once you get a decent bevel established, you actually will be able to feel it when you contact the platen. If you see a spot that you need to hit, you don't have to completely do this every time. You can do it in spots, especially with a bigger knife. And you can tell by now, I can feel that bevel on that platen. It just fits right there. And so I'm able to maintain that consistent flatness. Okay, so let's take this project over the table and I'll show you, you can see a little bit better what we're doing here. Okay, this is a little bit easier to see now, but I've completed my first side of my bevels, my initial grinds. As you can see, compared to this side, that's that original bevel just to establish my cutting edge. It's pretty much gone on this side. Now, we've still got some cleaning up to do, but I've taken the grind all the way up to the spine. Majority of that initial bevel is gone. So I know that I'm not going to be favoring one side or the other, that this is nice and centered. Now, it's going to be hard to see, and I'll maybe show you this again afterwards. But the plunge lines already are looking really good. And so now I'm ready to go back over to the grinder and do the bevels on this side. I'm not gonna film that. This is just to give you some good basic ideas and everything. Another couple keys. I mean, these things keep on popping into my head. Okay, but another key to getting good bevels is this being nice and flat. Okay. If it's warped or it's fatter in spots, you're going to see that when you're grinding your bevels. It may not be you. It might just be that the steel's a little bit uneven. So eventually, if you can get a surface grinder or something like that, that's optimal. What I might do, though, is kind of show you a way to try to get this as flat as possible. It's not a method that I use anymore, but it'd be something to help you out. Another thing to factor in is this blade might not intentionally be flat per se. Sometimes when we're bladesmithing, we're forging our blades, we'll put in what's called a distal taper. And what that means is the blade is fatter right by the choil, but the further down the spine you go towards the tip, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But the grinding basics apply to any kind of whether it's got a distal taper or not. The biggest key is, again, having it horizontal with the platen at all times. A lot of times I can tell, just because of my experience, if you've got unevenness or gouges or whatever, I can almost tell what you did wrong and it can be corrected. But this will not happen overnight. This takes just a lot of practice and, you know, a lot of failures, but eventually you'll get it. Okay, you will get it. If I can get it, you can get it. Another thing you can do is practice on like scrap steel. You can practice on low carbon steel or even wood. Now, I know there are makers out there that disagree with that. They say, well, you don't get the right feel because low carbon steel feels different than high carbon steel. Wood has less resistance. Yeah, I understand that, but at least you're learning the mechanics, how to stand, how to be perpendicular with the platen at all times. You are learning those things. Okay, so I mean, everybody has a right to their opinion, but I'm a firm believer in practice, practice, practice. And you will get that muscle memory down. And plus, you don't go through all the hard work of, either forging a blade, cutting out a blade, the heat treat and everything like that, only to take it over to a grinder and ruin it. Practice. Practice your grinding skills. They will come around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this knife file guide off. I'm going to show you, demonstrate a little bit how the knife grinding jig works. I'm not going to use it a lot because I don't use them often anymore. But again, it is a tool that can help you establish some good muscle memory and take some of the factors out of it, if that makes sense. So let me get that set up. I'll show you how it works a little bit and we'll continue on. Okay, before I demonstrate the knife grinding jig, I wanted to finish up my initial grind on the other side of my bevels. And I ran into a situation and I wanted to share it with you. I was grinding my secondary bevel on the other side, and I almost got to the top, and I still had quite a bit of that initial bevel down by my cutting edge left. What that tells me was I was not at an aggressive enough angle. I was too flat. So what was going to end up happening was I was going to have my grind come all the way to the spine, but my cutting edge was going to be way too thick. So when you run into that, what you have to do is you have to shift your angle just a little bit more and start regrinding. So you can see I already started doing that. You can see this was like my initial grinding right here. And you can see where I shifted, increase the angle, and start bringing it up more to where I'm not going to have any of that initial bevel on my cutting edge. So I wanted to share that with you. Sometimes you're going to have to adjust a little bit. And that's how you do it. You would just change your angle a little bit. And again, once you get this established enough, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel it hit the platen and it almost kind of guide you. And if you're finessing it, you can even feel it a lot easier. If you're hogging material, you probably won't feel that, and you're going to have different patches of angles all over this thing, and you're not going to be consistent. So I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to go ahead and finish this initial side off, and then, I will demonstrate a little bit the knife grinding jig. Okay, so I finished up grinding on the other side of the blade. I've got my initial bevels in now. And now we're ready to progress to a 60 grit belt, or that's what I do. I progress to a 60 grit belt because we're not finished yet. We've got a rough grind, but we want to keep on getting that refined a little bit more and more, getting the cutting edge thinner and thinner a little bit, and eventually setting it up to where we're ready to start hand sanding. But again, I promised you that I would show you a little bit on how these knife grinding jigs work. I'm not going to do a lot on it because I've already pretty much got my bevels ground, but I promise you to show you this. You'll need a work rest, and one thing you want to make sure of is it's 90 degrees with your platen. Okay, so check that first. Now I've got my blade in my jig now. And this is adjustable by turning these screws, okay? It changes the angle of how it makes contact with the platen. And because I've already ground this once by hand, I got to kind of figure out now what angle to set this jig. So one thing I can do is take a Sharpie and we can just put some marks on this blade. And so we can see where, or you could use your layout fluid. That would actually get a lot better coverage. and then we'll make a pass and we'll see how this is contacting. So you can see I need to adjust my angle more. I need to tilt it more towards the belt because I made contact up by the spine, but I didn't make contact down here by my cutting edge. So what I'll do is I'll loosen these screws up and kind of change my angle a little bit. And if you're doing your initial grinds with your 36 grit, you wouldn't have to go through this. You just find something that's satisfactory and run with it. And it would be then set. But because I've already ground those bevels in, I got to kind of do this a little bit. Okay. You can see now we've made better contact. And we could actually probably run with this. This would eventually start pulling up into the full body, and we could keep that angle. And then once we get this side done, we would just take the blade off, turn it around, and then do the other side. And as you can see, I mean, this does help you. Now I don't have to worry about this or this. This is taking care of it. And you can even put lines across your workstation to kind of help you go straight back and forth. So this is a good tool for beginners, learning how to get to grind, because it does take some of the fact that you're not freehanding everything. But eventually, you know, you'll get to the point where you won't need this anymore. But that's how a knife grinding jig works. And again, I made this myself, but you can get them online. Any, you know, knife maker supply places usually has one or two different kinds. My biggest thing is, though, you know, eventually you want to work towards not needing one at all. Okay, as I previously mentioned, we're ready to move on to the 60 grit. We already did a little bit with the jig. What we want to do now is use the 60 grit to better refine this. As you can see, there's still a little bit of that bevel up there. We're still going to take off more material. These are my plunge lines. As you can see, they're fairly good. Okay, they're pretty close. But when I'm progressing with these belts, now I can kind of, I need to tweak these a little bit, I can. Some makers also, and this is your preference, some, they don't like these harsh lines. So when we get into the higher grit belts, like I'm going to be using some like 220 belts and stuff, you can start softening that up a little bit if you want to. So each kind of belt, each phase does a little bit different. The 36 grit, we remove a lot of steel, but we're left with a really rough finish. We do want to leave ourselves a little bit of room on the edge because we are still going to be, you know, grinding, and you don't want to get this too thin too early. Remember now that this is a lot thinner, it can get hot a lot quicker, okay? So again, be mindful of how hot this is getting, because if you see a big black spot or blue spot emerging on here, you got it too hot, you've burned out the temper, and now it's got to have a nice soft spot there, which you don't want. And you're left with only a couple options. One, you can grind back to where it wasn't overheated, or you'd have to reheat treat the knife. Okay, so we really want to avoid that. And several of the tips I've been giving you helps you avoid that. One is not just slamming this thing into that belt. Just guide it, okay? And you're not going to get as much of a buildup of heat. You have more control. And if you do make a boo-boo, it's not going to be as drastic, okay? So with the magic of video editing, I am going to video me doing the 60 grit a little bit. Going to speed it up so this video doesn't take 3 hours to watch. And by now I've got a really good established bevel. So I can feel it when it's flat on that platen. The initial bevel with the 36 bit's the toughest. Well, what you can do is you can start in the middle here a little bit, go back to your plunge line, and then proceed. I'm also I'm increasing my angle just a little bit because my cutting edge is still pretty thick. So I want to thin that down. So I'm going to increase the angle just a little bit and bring this all in and clean it all up. Okay, so pretty much finished with the 60 grit on this side. I'm going to do the other side off camera, and we'll just keep on proceeding. Okay, so I just finished up with the 60 grit, and as you can see, I've got my cutting edge a lot thinner, still keeping the center line nice and straight. Our plunge lines look pretty good. Might need a little bit of cleaning up to do, but not a lot. And so now I'm ready to proceed to even a higher grit belt. We can start cleaning this up a little bit more right in here, because that 36 grit's got to leave some deep scratches right in here. So we'll keep on doing our belt progression. I'm not going to video all of that because, you know, grinding is grinding. But what I will do is show you after each belt the progression we're making. So again, the higher or the lower grit belts, we're doing more of stock remove. We're removing metal, getting us a nice bevel. But when you get to the higher grit belts, now you're refining. So I'm going to get started on that. Okay, so I just finished up my next belt progression. This is a Trizac A65 belt. I believe it's equivalent to about a 120 grit. But these are awesome belts. They last a super long time. They give you a really good finish as well. So I like to utilize these in my belt progression. This is the other side that's not been finished. So as you can see, it's starting to get a nice cleaner look. I also I like to leave a little bit of the belt over the platen on this. That way I can get into my plunge lines a little bit better, clean them up, start cleaning them up a little bit, blending them. And you can see now my plunge lines are pretty nice and even. I still got a little bit of cleaning up to do, but they're starting to look pretty good. Looks like I need to take a little bit out right there to get those nice and evened up. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Another thing you do want to do, or I suggest, is since we've been grinding this top spine can be kind of sharp. So I'll kind of do this a little bit, just real lightly to soften that up a little bit, because you really don't want that. That could harm somebody if they're holding the blade like this. So just make a couple passes where that edge is on the spine and kind of soften that up a little bit. Okay, so the last belt progression or belt that I used in my progressions today was another Trizac belt. This is an A300, and it's even more fine than the 65. And as you can see, it leaves a pretty decent finish. But we're not done yet. But for the most part, we've got a nice bevel now, got a decent thickness on our cutting edge. And this is where we're going to leave off today on the grinder. We're ready to start planning on what our final finish is going to be on our knife. But we're really close. Plunge lines look really good. This is one thing that people will look at, is your plunge lines. Go to a knife shop sometime. Take a look, and you will be surprised at what you see on professionally made knives. These are uneven. One's off to the side, one's further back. But that's the attention to details that I'd like to help share with you to be a better maker and give you good habits. So our next video is going to be finishing. We're going to figure out what kind of patina or whatever surface we want, and I'll show you how to do it. Okay, everybody, that's going to conclude today's video on our 101 series. We've got our knife ground now. We've got some nice bevels, nice even plunge line, centered cutting edge. And so again, next video is going to be, we're going to be focusing on good finish. We're going to be doing hand sanding. After that video, I believe we'll move on to handles. And then the last video will be on sharpening. So we're getting really close. Couple things to keep in mind here. I know I'm using a 2x72 grinder. You don't need one. You can get a smaller belt grinder for a couple $100. I think there's like a 1x30 or 2x42. There's a couple different varieties out there that you could get at Harbor Freight, Temu or whatever. I'm not really sure where to get those. Grizzly has one. It even has a variable speed. So you don't have to go out and spend a couple $1,000s on a grinder. But as you can see, that's really the way to go. I know some people that do filing, but that takes a very long time. I guess it all depends on how motivated you are and how big your bank is. But eventually, if you want to do this as a hobby or even more, you are going to want to invest in a decent belt grinder. So I thank you again for joining us. I hope that you learn some things. There is quite a bit to learn on grinding to get efficient, but if you stick with it, you'll get it. Okay. So thanks again and stay sharp, everybody.